Well, I went to go look at another vehicle to add potentially to my collection, and what else would it be but a Mercury? This 1971 Marquis Brougham that has about 38,000 miles on it, and in a pretty rare color combination, white with a black top and a black interior. You didn't see black interiors very often, hardly ever on one of these, and the 1971 model is also quite rare, and I think the best and most desirable of this 1971 to 78 generation. I'll tell you a little bit why. Now, the 1971 was all new sheet metal. This car came out in 1969 of this generation full-size car, but all the sheet metal was new for the 1971 model year. And this is the only model year in which the 429 cubic inch V8 that was standard equipment was still a premium fuel V8. In 1972, it would go to low compression and it would get D2 VE heads, which were well known for their low compression as well as spark knock. So bear that in mind. If you get a 1972 Mercury or Ford product with one of these 429s or 460s, they did introduce the 460 partway through the 1972 model year as an option. Before that, it had been a Lincoln exclusive. In any case, the 429s and 460s that are produced in 1972 and 1972 alone have these D2 VE heads that are prone to detonation. They're fine if you fill them up on kind of premium fuel or 89 octane fuel these days, but don't expect to fill them up on regular. Now, the 71 Marquis Brougham, I think, is my favorite, as I mentioned, of the generation. That's really because of this front end. It's a one-year-only grille, this kind of crosshatch pattern in the middle that spills out over to the sides. Of course, with hidden headlamps and the power bulge hood, that would be very similar to what Lincoln would have on the Continental. Notice even the badging on this up front. It's the Lincoln Mercury crest that looks very Cadillac-y, but it's not Cadillac, it's Mercury. And Cadillac also had that kind of prow on the hood. So both Mercury as well as Lincoln and Cadillac were doing something similar with the visual cues up front. Now, in 1972, the grille texture would change to a more thick, kind of egg crate-like texture, similar to what Olds would usually use on their 98s. And I think it's fine, but I don't think it's quite as elegant as the grille texture on this 71. I love the little dainty bumper guards up front. Unfortunately, by the way, this big grille that you see here is plastic. Interestingly, it was plastic in 1971, 72, would go to metal for 1973 and 1973 only, and then for 1974, back to plastic. And of course, the car would change in 1973 with the bumper impact standards up front, so it didn't quite have the same look as it previously did. As we turn to the side view, this is what I love about these. They really look like a sketch. That greenhouse is so pinched relative to the body, and the body looks massive. It's just this one convex surface from the belt line down to where you have that little flare and the feature line where the rocker then tucks in beneath that. And you can see the rocker tucking in actually helps visually slim the body because that puts that in a shadow. But all of the highlights and the reflections are just uniform across the body side on this. And that helps give it a greater look of length. Now, these were large cars, over 220 inches long, riding atop a 124-inch wheelbase. The Fords were 121, the Mercury's 124, and then the Lincolns were 127, except wagons. If you got a Mercury wagon, you got the Ford wheelbase. So you got shortchanged. Actually, the wagon, interestingly, despite the fact that it looks huge, is the shortest of all of them, even shorter than the coupe because of that. Now, one other thing I'll point out from a styling perspective is that this car definitely has some dash to axle, but this is during the era where Ford, for whatever reason, kind of liked these symmetric front and rear overhangs. You'll notice that the front overhang, although it's obscured by an engine hoist here, my apologies, this was where the car was, the front overhang's pretty long, and the rear overhang, of course, is pretty long. Now, you almost want to put those front wheels forward a little bit more, give it more dash to axle, but I think the Ford stylist thought that it had enough as it was. This car also has kind of the last of the little bit of a Coke bottle design with that kick up around the rear quarter glass. The body flares outboard around the rear wheel ever so gently, but not enough to really call it a true Coke bottle design car. But Ford held on to that styling trait well beyond General Motors. A number of General Motors cars had it, most particularly the mid-1960s Pontiacs. You could say the 63 through 5 Riviera. Also the Studebaker Avanti was a car with that so-called Coke bottle design. But by this point, it was getting a little long in the tooth, but Ford was still using it here on this car and then also on cars like the Torino. And then here you have the rear three-quarter view. This is also a phenomenal view, in my opinion, and a one-year-only view because you have the wall-to-wall tail light on the 1971s. That would go away for 1972, and that midsection would kind of become a decorative panel. The outer portions, the outer lights would remain the same. And in 1972, they would remove the deck lid trunk lock cover for 72 and 73 before bringing it back in 74. So 71 has it, as you can see here. 74 has it. They are slightly different. The 74 is riveted to the deck lid, and the 71, I think, just has some regular fasteners. I'll have to look on mine, but it's definitely a different part, slightly different, although I believe the cover itself that goes over the trunk lock is the same. Now, I love this view as well because it looks like you could land a helicopter on the deck lid of this car. It's long, it's flat, it's wide, it kind of curls over at the rearmost portion of the car, very gently radiused, but other than that, it's absolutely huge. And these cars do have an immense deep well trunk that Ford was known for during this time frame and all the way up to the Panther platform cars and the final vehicles in that run. I do like also how the backlight, the bottom corners are not just kind of squared off. They have a little bit of a 45-degree angle to them before they run horizontal. I always thought that was a cool touch. And of course, if this car didn't look long enough from this angle, the designers had to put those rear fender skirts on there just to make that quarter panel look even larger. Man, that is a big quarter panel. And it's trimmed with the bright work on the Brougham models, which helps, I think, with the panel transitions and makes them very crisp and has the highlights really stop at that piece of bright work, which I think works on this car. Now let's transition to the fun part, and that is the interior. And this car has the optional twin comfort lounge seats with the high backrest. And you'll see in a moment how high they are. Those seats were only offered from 71 to 73. In 1974, they would still call them, I believe, twin comfort lounge seats, but they weren't as high as these were. And they're supremely comfortable. They have this kind of crisscross pattern, diamond pattern, very similar to the 1969 Mark III interior, at least the door panel and the seat stitch pattern on the Mark III, but here rotated by 90 degrees. So you got great luxury, great padded armrests. This car does have the 3-spoke rim blow non-cruise control wheel. It does have air conditioning. I don't think it has a tilt wheel. The car did come standard with power windows on the Marquis Broughams. You could have a roll-up windows in your Marquis Brougham as a credit option, and you actually got the standard Marquis door panel when you did that. They downgraded your door panel from the Marquis Brougham, which here there's really no provision for a crank in terms of how the door panel is molded. So that's probably why they did that. This car does not have power locks, but it does have a power seat on the driver's side. So it has a few options. It has a standard engine under hood, which we'll talk about in a moment. I can't quite tell if those are the deluxe belts or not. Of course, I think those are the deluxe belts. The non-deluxe belts were black as well. They just had a different buckle. And I think these actually are the deluxe belts. So it's got a few options. That steering wheel, by the way, is a rim blow steering wheel. You pinch the rim in order to honk it. And here you are with the interior. Wow, look at those seats. It feels so overstuffed. Remember, the greenhouse in this car is pretty squinty, and the seats are absolutely huge. So when you get in it, it does feel a little bit like the seating is too puffed up. But you know what? It's awesome. And these are my favorite Fords ever. They drive so smoothly. The seats are so comfortable. They're so quiet. I have to say the 73 and the 74 are quieter yet. The 71 and 2, but the 71 and 2 are, really, really nice cars. By 1975 and then through 78, Ford really just started taking cost out every year. So my recommendation, if you're going to get one of these, get a 71 to 74. I think you're going to be more pleased than if you get a 75 to 78. Although the latter are not bad cars. You just don't have everything that these do. I mean, Ford even started taking off the pedal trim and the bright work on the pedal trim to try to save cost and the armrests out of the rear. And then they would start fixing the rear glass as well in the mid-1970s in order to take the cost out too. So there was no power window motor to move the rear quarter glass any longer. Although you can find the components and put them in relatively easily. They just kind of left everything so with the appropriate provision to put in the window regulators and motors. And under hood, this car had the standard 429 cubic inch 2 Venturi. That's not 2 valve, that's 2 Venturi. Ford, for whatever reason, used to call the carburetors 2 Venturi and 4 Venturi as opposed to 2 barrel and 4 barrel. I guess it's actually probably a better description. It is truly 2 Venturis. In any case, this made 320 gross horsepower and very, very smooth engine. Extremely smooth. The 429s, I would say, from 1971 are among some of the smoothest V8s that have ever been produced. For whatever reason, the engine, as it evolved, I think Ford took some cost out. And when it became a 460 in its later years under the Marquis hood, like in 1975 through 78, it's still smooth, but it's not quite as smooth and whisper silent as this particular V8 is. These almost sound like a turbine if you have the stock exhaust on them because the stock exhaust is so quiet. You hear no exhaust burble at all. All you hear is kind of the whirring of the declutching fan under hood as you accelerate. And it's just sublime. It's wonderful. These cars did have an optional 429 cubic inch 4 Venturi engine that made 360 gross horsepower and gave you a little bit more scoot. But truthfully, the 2-barrel actually feels peppier having owned both. The 2-barrel feels peppier around town. It does wheeze a little bit at upper RPMs, but from a torque perspective and getting off the line, it's excellent. And by the way, the Autolite 2100 2-barrel carburetor is far, far better than the Autolite 4300 that was the standard 4-barrel carburetor on these that was quite troublesome. If you have one of those, be sure to block off the secondary needle and seat with a plug that you can get, by the way, from Mike's Carburetor Parts. It just screws into the secondary needle and seat, and that makes them significantly more reliable. Otherwise, they had a tendency to flood out. But by this point, Ford had really stepped up their game, I will say, on the HVAC as well. This is before they went to the GM HVAC compressor, or the AC compressor. But it still is a better setup than the previous generation car that went through 1968. Those had a little bit puny of a setup. The same compressor, the same 2-piston compressor, but they did a nicer job, and the system has a bit more capacity. And I will say it is quite cold if you are driving in one of these. So no need to worry about not having cold air conditioning in your Ford from this era. So what do you think of the 71 Marquis Brougham Coupe? Should I buy it? Yeah, I like it, but the seller kind of wants, I think, a little bit too much money for it. And so I've passed for now. We'll see if he changes his expectations. But overall, it's a sweet ride, and I really like the color combination. The white with the black. I do wish it were all black. I think it would look really sinister then. The white with the black really looks nice. So we'll see what happens. Maybe his expectations will change. You never know. But my God, look at this rear view. Oh, God, is that perfect. It just looks so wide with that relatively thin deck lid in terms of the vertical height, the huge wall-to-wall tail lamp. Oh, man, this just looks so nice. Well, we'll see what happens. Thanks again for watching.